What's going on, guys? Happy Halloween. Or almost Halloween. I know you guys have been liking the ghost content, so here's another video for you. This is the top 10 most haunted places in North Dakota. Number 10. Riverside Cemetery. This is the oldest and largest cemetery in Fargo, dating back to 1879. There are over 18,000 people buried here, and while cemeteries are meant to give people a final resting place, it would seem many occupants are not exactly resting. There are many ex-caretakers who will deny it being haunted, but some visitors say otherwise. The two mausoleums have reports of knocks and screams coming from the inside. Pictures taken in the cemetery often show mists and orbs that weren't there before, and those who have visited the cemetery at night report the feeling of being watched by something all the way back to their cars. Number 9. The Old Armory. The Old Armory was built in 1915, originally being used by Company E of the National Guard. Before this, they had nowhere for their drills. They would train in any place that they could find, such as streets and open fields. In addition to being used by the National Guard, the building was also used as the town's auditorium, hosting events such as plays, political rallies, dances, and even car shows. The National Guard moved to a new building in 1957, and the Old Armory was used as a recreation center until 1983. However, the building was never truly abandoned. It went through many renovations during the 90s and early 2000s, and is now being used as a center for performing arts. It is also frequently rented for weddings, funerals, concerts, and dances. While the Old Armory seems to have no reason to be haunted, many say it very much is. Some have sworn they've seen old mannequins move on their own. There are also reports of whispers from multiple areas, and the ghost of a soldier is often seen guarding a staircase. Number 8. Custer House. When Lieutenant Colonel George Custer's house burned to the ground in 1873, he decided to build a much nicer home than the original. It was to be one that he could be proud of, and that truly showed his status. The common rooms were large enough to accommodate big groups of people for parties or meetings. There was even a game room where Custer and his officers could discuss issues over a friendly game of pool. Everything from windows to furniture was brought in by train. He wanted it to be a place where people could socialize. Unfortunately, Custer and his wife Libby would only get to enjoy this house for a couple years. In June 1876, with Libby and the other wives of Custer's officers gathered at the home, the unfortunate news was brought that Custer and his officers had died at the Battle of Little Bighorn. After his death, it seems his spirit made its way back to his home, later to be joined by his wife, Libby. Today, if you enter the home, you may feel both of their presences. The ghost of Libby has been seen in a black dress, usually peering out of windows. From time to time, a human impression is found on a certain bed in the morning, and the sad sounds of women crying can be heard. This is likely Libby and the other wives reliving the tragic news of their husband's death. Number 7. Children's Museum at Yunker Farm. While the Children's Museum may come off as a friendly and welcoming place, it has a much more eerie side to it. The museum was originally a farmhouse, built for Newton Whitman, his wife, and their 8 children, but he eventually sold the property to John and Elizabeth Yunker in 1905. There they raised their 10 children. The home stayed in their family until 1968, when their son Lawrence retired and sold the farm. In 1985, the Junior League of Fargo and the Fargo Park District came up with the idea to turn it into a children's museum, and 4 years later, in 1989, it was completed and opened. While no paranormal investigations have ever been allowed in the museum, stories of ghost activity have been told by many. Elizabeth was a very loving mother, so all the children being in her home is a paranormal trigger for her to appear, and her presence has been felt throughout the home. Doors and windows open and close on their own, and the elevator also seems to be a hotspot, going between floors on its own. According to an urban legend, a young girl tragically drowned in the well at the museum. A young ghost hunter claimed to see her in broad daylight, standing beside the well. He said he felt a pain in his chest and said he couldn't breathe for a few seconds, as if he was drowning. Could this have been the little girl trying to tell him how she sadly died? Number 6. The Totten Trail Historic Inn. This historic inn is one of the many buildings at the Fort Totten State Historic Site. Built from 1867 to 1873, this building was originally used as a boarding school for Native American children. Places like this were said to be very difficult to live in, and there were many deaths of children who stayed here. Eventually, it became a quarters for officers in the 19th century, and after that, it traded ownership multiple times, with one of these owners being a couple who had sadly died in the home. Those who have stayed at this historic inn report the feeling of always being watched. Some who have felt this feeling have even turned around to see a shadow darting around a corner. as if it had been watching you and got caught. People have also said they have woken up to see a shadow figure standing in the corner. Objects often move from room to room, and doors open and close on their own. Apparitions have been seen on many occasions, and usually the apparitions are of young Native American children who appear and vanish within seconds. Number 5. North Dakota State University. Opened in 1890, the haunted halls of this university have been spoken about for over 130 years. There are two different locations on campus that are said to be especially haunted. The first being Minard Hall, which has a well-known story attached to it. The story goes, in the 1920s, the fourth floor attic was originally used as a dance floor. One night, a janitor had entered the room and found two people dead. This case went unsolved, though many believed it was a double homicide. The floor was later converted into a lab, but in the 1960s, it was closed for good, due to unstable floorboards. Several students have snuck up to this closed area, and have come back with tales of a strange presence watching them. The second haunted location is Ceres Hall, in which the third floor is particularly active. It has been said a man had hung himself on the third floor during World War II. There are also stories of a female student who was having trouble with grades and hung herself, also on the third floor. On this floor at night, mysterious loud noises can be heard, as well as doors slamming shut, shadow figures, and cold spots. The basement of Ceres Hall is also said to be haunted. Many people who have ventured down to the basement report immediate panic and a strong fight or flight response. Investigators have also reported whispering voices and an odd red ball of light. Number 4. St. Joseph's Hospital. The hospital was established in 1912. When it was realized that there was a need for a centralized hospital. It was in operations for around 110 years until 2012, when the now old buildings needed new modern upgrades to offer the best care possible, and a new hospital was built. However, the original building was not fully abandoned, as there are currently plans to turn it into a behavioral center for mental health care patients. Stories of the haunted hospital have been told since well before it shut down. The elevator, on multiple occasions, has brought itself down to the morgue without anyone requesting it. The doors to the morgue are also said to open on their own. What makes this especially unsettling is that the morgue doors are impossible to open unless you have the access key. There are many doors throughout the hospital that open and close at will. Sometimes when they open, they even refuse to close, as if somebody is forcing it open. Some residents have heard soft whispering throughout the place, and it's said they can be heard especially loud in the cafeteria. There is one terrifying story about an elderly farmer who was admitted to St. Joseph's. He had come out of his room fully clothed and went to the nurse's station. He said, "Well, I have had enough. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go ahead and leave." Seeing as he was well enough to get dressed, the nurse didn't stop him. When the next nurse made her rounds, it was found the farmer had died in his room well before he had spoken to the nurse. It is said objects mysteriously move around his room, and when the room is completely empty, the call button is pushed several times, even after it was replaced. Number 3. Harvey Public Library. While it may look completely innocent on the outside, the Harvey Public Library has a terrible story attached to it. Long before the library was constructed, there was originally a house at the location. The home was owned by Sophia Eberlin Benz and Jacob Bentz. One night, Jacob flew into a terrible rage, and while Sophia was asleep, he bludgeoned her to death with a hammer. Reportedly, he first tried to burn her body in the furnace. When that didn't work, he put her body into a car, filled it with straw, and set it on fire to make it seem like she died in a fiery blaze. After the funeral, one of Sophia's daughters, Lillian, found blood in the house. Jacob admitted to his crime and was sentenced to life in prison. At some point, the house was moved somewhere else. Several people have tried to live there, but end up having to leave due to strange happenings. 59 years later, the library was built on the site of the old home. Hauntings began immediately. Chairs would be moved, books would be shoved off the shelves, and there was one story of a large S appearing on one of the computer screens in the morning. Library visitors also report seeing lights turning on and off, strange orbs, feelings of being touched, and a strong sense of dread when entering the library. Number 2. University of North Dakota. UND was founded in 1883, 6 years before North Dakota itself was established as a state. There have been an unsettling amount of tragic deaths on campus since the university opened. Gustafson Hall is one of the more haunted locations on campus, and it has a dark history. In 1918, when the influenza pandemic struck UND, Gustafson Hall was turned into a temporary infirmary. However, the university was unprepared for this, as they lacked bed sheets, toiletries, and doctors. A total of 29 people died at UND, and somewhere between 10 to 12 died in Gustafson Hall. Much later, in 1963, when Gustafson Hall was being used as a frat house, a young man named Dale Howes died of acute alcohol poisoning. Many staff members at Gustafson Hall have seen ghostly apparitions, and one woman, named Lynette Krenelka, said she was working late one night when she felt something touch the back of her neck. She said she had heard odd noises before and felt presences, but it never unnerved her like this. Then suddenly, she heard furniture being violently pushed around upstairs, and she ran from the building. She never stayed there late again. There is also a story of a custodial worker who was cleaning at Gustafson Hall at night. He liked to put a radio on as he worked, so he put one on the first floor as he was cleaning the second floor. The radio lost signal and went to static. When he went downstairs to check on it, he saw a young man with his back turned near his radio. Then suddenly, the boy faded away. The custodian left immediately and refused to ever return to Gustafson Hall. Another haunted building on campus is the Sigma Alpha Epsilon House. In 1971, the house caught fire. Pamela Stern and Tony Stein tragically died. Pamela is said to watch over women who stay in the house, and she has been seen in hallway mirrors as people walk by. The ghost of Tony is believed to haunt the basement, where he died trying to escape the fire. People get very eerie feelings in the basement, and strange noises can be heard down there at night. Bartness Theater on campus is said to have 3 ghosts. A boy named Stu, who was known in life to be quite a handyman. He loved the theater and would often be called there to fix things. Since his death, many broken objects will be miraculously fixed without a visit from maintenance. The second is the ghost of a woman who is often seen backstage in a long Victorian dress. The third was a homeless man who died in the theater, and he is often said to play the piano at night. There are multiple other haunted locations, but for the final one, I'll talk about West Hall. In a blizzard in 1962, a young woman slipped on some ice near West Hall. She sadly froze to death during the blizzard. Tunnels were constructed connecting West Hall to the dining center after her death, and the tunnels go over the same spot she died in. Since her death, she has been seen in the tunnels, and is described as having short black hair and is usually missing her legs. Strangest of all, there is said to be a goat that haunts the 4th floor of West Hall, and is often seen kicking trash cans and jumping into the elevator. Number 1. Sandhaven Sanatorium. Near the town of Dunseith, North Dakota, lies the crumbling ruins of the old Sandhaven Sanatorium. Opened in 1912, the hospital was originally used for tuberculosis patients, though it eventually became a facility for many things, including mental illnesses. As tuberculosis became more and more treatable, the hospital eventually became an asylum and stopped treating patients of tuberculosis altogether. However, in the late 1980s, there was problems with overcrowding, mistreatment of patients, and a general lack of understanding on how to treat mental illness, so the hospital was forced to permanently close its doors in 1987. Upwards of 1,000 people died during their stays at Sandhaven, and unfortunately, many of these people were put into unmarked graves on the hospital grounds. There is also a sad story attached to this building. In 2001, there was a tragic accident where a 17-year-old boy was exploring the abandoned hospital with his friends. He slipped and fell down an old elevator shaft and tragically died. Visitors to Sandhaven have told stories of loud crying, disembodied voices, loud footsteps, and floating humanoid figures. Many have also felt a strong feeling of dread when in or around the old buildings. I hope you all enjoyed that video. I hope everyone enjoys their Halloween. Make sure to eat some candy and watch some more actual ghosty. Peace, happy Halloween.